Hello everybody, welcome to our new audiobook series. ये सीरीज़ वी आर स्टार्टिंग अ न्यू वन जहाँ पे जितनी भी NCERTs हैं, रेलेवेंट NCERTs एंड जितनी भी रिसोर्स बुक्स हैं उन सब की मैं एक ऑडियो बुक आपको प्रोवाइड करूँगा. कपल ऑफ पॉइंट्स अबाउट दिस सीरीज इज कि ये यूजुअल जो टेक्स्ट टू स्पीच मैकेनिकल मशीन वॉइस होती है उसमें नहीं होगी. मैं खुद इन बुक्स को रीड करूँगा एंड साथ ही साथ जो PDF स्क्रीन पे चलेंगी वो हाईलाइटेड होंगी रेलेवेंट पोर्शन के हिसाब से. सो ये आपको हेल्प करेगा कि कहाँ पे आपको कौन से इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट्स है जिन्हें मार्क करना है. साथ ही साथ मैं बीच में आपको बताता भी जाऊँगा. सो आई विल रिकमेंड कि जब भी आप इस सीरीज़ को देखें, सारे वीडियोस को देखें, तो आप अपनी बुक एंड एक मार्कर साथ लेकर बैठें ताकि आप ही मेरे साथ उन चीज़ों को मार्क कर पाएँ और आपको एक बेटर रिजल्ट इस सीरीज़ से मिल पाएगा. As we'll move forward, you will see what I'm talking about and you will see how it is very fruitful for you in your journey. So let's dive in. Chapter 1, Constitution, Why and How. Introduction. This book is about the working of the Indian Constitution. In the chapters that follow, you will read information about various aspects of the working of our Constitution. You will learn about the various institutions of the government in our country and their relationship with each other. But before you begin to read about elections, governments, and presidents and prime ministers, it is necessary to understand that the entire structure of the government and the various principles that bind the institutions of government have their origin in the Constitution of India. After studying this chapter, you will learn what a constitution means, what a constitution does to the society, how constitution govern the allocation of power in society, and what was the way in which the Constitution of India was made. Why do we need a constitution? What is a constitution? What are its functions? What role does it perform for society? How does a constitution relate to our daily existence? Answering these questions is not as difficult as you might think. Constitution allows coordination and assurance. Imagine yourself to be a member of a reasonably large group. Further, imagine that this group has the following characteristics. The members of this group are diverse in various ways. They have different religious allegiance. Some are Hindus, some are Muslims, some are Christians, and some perhaps profess no religion at all. They are also varied in many different respects. They pursue different professions, have different abilities, have different hobbies, different taste in everything from films to books. Some are rich and some are poor. Some are cold, some young. Imagine further that the members of this group are likely to have disputes over various aspects of life. How much property should one be allowed to own? Should it be compulsory that every child be sent to school, or should the parents be allowed to decide? How much should this group spend on its safety and security? Or should it build more parks instead? Should the group be allowed to discriminate against some of its members? Every question will elicit a variety of answers from different people. But for all their diversity, this group has to live together. They are dependent upon each other in various ways. They require the cooperation of each other. What will enable the group to live together peacefully? One may say that perhaps members of this group can live together if they can agree on some basic rules. Why will the group need certain basic rules? Think of what would happen in the absence of some basic rules. Every individual would be insecure simply because they would not know what members of this group could do to each other. Who could claim rights over what? Any group will need some basic rules that are publicly promulgated and known to all members of that group to achieve a minimal degree of coordination. But these rules must not only be known, they must also be enforceable. If citizens have no assurance that others will follow these rules, they will themselves have no reason to follow these rules. Saying that the rules are legally enforceable gives an assurance to everybody that others will follow these rules, for if they do not do so, they will be punished. The first function of the Constitution is to provide a set of basic rules that allow for minimal coordination amongst members of a society. For those who are reading this, this is an important thing. You should mark this. Reading further, significance of decision making powers. A constitution is a body of fundamental principles according to which a state is constituted and or governed. But what should these fundamental rules be? And what makes them fundamental? Well, the first question you will have to decide is who get to decide what laws governing the society should be. You may want rule X, but others may want rule Y. How do we decide whose rules or preferences should govern us? You may think the rules you want everyone to live by or are the best, but other thinks that their rules are the best. How do we resolve these disputes? So, even before you decide what rules should govern this group, you have to decide who gets to decide. The Constitution has to provide an answer to this question. It specifies the basic allocation of power in a society. It decides who get to decide what the laws will be. In principle, this question, who gets to decide, can be answered in many ways. In a monarchical constitution, a monarch decides. In some constitutions, like the old Soviet Union, one single party was given the power to decide. But in democratic constitutions, broadly speaking, the people get to decide. But this matter is not so simple because even if you answer that the people should decide, it will not answer the question how should the people decide. For something to be a law, should everyone agree to it? Should the people directly vote on each matter as the ancient Greeks did? Or should the people express their preferences by electing representatives? But if the people act through their representatives, how should these representatives be elected? How many should there be? In the Indian Constitution, for example, it is specified that in most instances, Parliament get to decide the laws and policies, and that Parliament is itself be organized in a particular manner. Before identifying what the laws in any given society is, you have to identify who has the authority to enact it. If Parliament has the authority to enact laws, there must be a law that bestows this authority on the Parliament in the first place. This is the function of a constitution. It is an authority that constitutes government in the first place. Please highlight this portion like you can see on the screen. Just highlight this. This is important part. The second function of the constitution is to specify who has the power to make decisions in a society. It decides how the government will be constituted. Limitation on the powers of government. But this is clearly not enough. Suppose you decide who had the authority to make decisions, but then this authority passed law that you might thought were patently unfair. It prohibits you from practicing your religion, for instance, or it enjoins the clothes of a certain color were prohibited, or that you were not free to sing certain songs, or that people who belong to a particular group, caste, or religion would always have to serve others and would not be allowed to retain any property, or that government could arbitrarily arrest someone, or that only people of certain skin color would be allowed to draw water from wells. You would obviously think these laws were unjust and unfair, and even though they were passed by a government that had come into existence based on certain procedures, there would be something obviously unjust about that government enacting these laws. So, the third function of the constitution is to set some limits on what the government can impose on its citizens. These limits are fundamental in the sense that government may never trespass them. Just highlight the third function of the constitution. This is very important, as you can see on the screen. Please mark them as it is. Constitutions limit the power of government in many ways. The most common way of limiting the power of government is to specify certain fundamental rights that all of us possess as citizens, and which no government can ever be allowed to violate. The exact content and interpretation of these rights varies from constitution to constitution, but most constitutions will protect a basic cluster of rights. Citizen will be protected from being arrested arbitrarily and for no reason. This is one basic limitation upon the power of the government. Citizens will normally have the right to some basic liberties, to freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of association, freedom to conduct a trade or business, etc. In practice, these rights can be limited during times of national emergency, and the constitution specifies the circumstances under which these rights may be withdrawn. Aspiration and goals of a society. Most of the older constitutions limited themselves largely to allocating decisions making power and setting some limits to government powers. But many 20th century constitutions, of which the Indian constitution is the finest example, also provide an enabling framework for the government to do certain positive things to express the aspiration and goals of a society. The Indian constitution was particularly innovative in this respect. Society with deep entrenched inequalities of various kinds will not only have to set limits on the power of government, they will also have to enable and empower the government to take positive measures to overcome forms of inequality or deprivation. For example, India aspires to be a society that is free of caste discrimination. If this is our society's aspiration, the government will have to be enabled or empowered to take all necessary steps to achieve this goal. In a country like South Africa, which had a deep history of racial discrimination, its new constitution had to enable a government to end racial discrimination. More positively, a constitution may enshrine the aspirations of a society. The framers of Indian constitution, for example, thought that each individual in society should have all that is necessary for them to lead a life of minimal dignity and social self-respect, minimum material well-being, education, etc. The Indian constitution enables the government to take positive welfare measures, some of which are legally enforceable. As we go on studying the Indian constitution, we shall find that such enabling provisions have the support of the preamble to our constitution, and these provisions are found in the section of fundamental rights. The directive principle of state policy are also enjoin the government to fulfill certain aspirations of the people. The fourth function of the constitution is to enable the government to fulfill the aspiration of a society and create conditions for a just society. Just mark the fourth function of the constitution the way you can see on the screen. Just highlight this as you can see on the screen. It is important, along with every other thing which you can see. Enabling provisions of the constitution. Constitutions are not only rules and regulations controlling the powers of the government, they also give powers to the government for pursuing collective good of the society. Constitution of South Africa assigns many responsibilities to the government. It wants the government to take measures to promote conservation of nature, makes efforts to protect persons or groups subjected to unfair discrimination, and provides that the government must progressively ensure adequate housing to all, healthcare, etc. In the case of Indonesia also, the government is enjoined to establish and conduct national education system. The Indonesian constitution ensures that the poor and destitute children will be looked after by the government. Fundamental identity of the people, of a people. Finally, and perhaps even most importantly, a constitution expresses the fundamental identity of a people. This means the people of as a collective entity come into being only through the basic constitution. It is by agreeing to a basic set of norms about how one should be governed and who should be governed that one forms a collective identity. Please kindly highlight this para. This para is important as far as mains goes. Some question can come about constitution, so this can be your introductory para. Kindly highlight this. One has many set of identities that exist prior to a constitution, but by agreeing to a certain basic norms and principles, one constitutes one's basic political identity. Second, constitutional norms are the overarching framework within which one pursues individual aspirations, goals, and freedoms. The constitution set authoritative constraints upon what one may or may not do. It defines the fundamental values that we may not trespass. So the constitution also gives one a moral identity. Kindly highlight this portion. Constitution also gives one a moral identity. This is important. Third and finally, it may be the case that many basic political and moral values are now shared across different constitutional traditions. If one looks at constitutions around the world, they differ in many respects. In the form of government, they enjoin in many procedural details, but they also share a good deal. Most modern constitutions create a form of government that is democratic in some respects. Most claims to protect certain basic rights. But constitutions are different in the way they embody conceptions and of national identity. Most nations are an amalgamation of a complex set of historical traditions. They weave together the diverse groups that reside within the nation in different ways. For example, German identity was constituted by being ethnically German. The constitution gave expression to this identity. The Indian constitution, on the other hand, does not make ethnic identity a criteria for citizenship. Different nations embody different conceptions of what the relationship between the different regions of a nation and the central government should be. The relationship constitutes the national identity of a country. The authority of a constitution. We have outlined some of the functions a constitution performs. These functions explain why most societies have a constitution. But there are three further questions we can ask about constitutions. A. What is a constitution? B. How effective is a constitution? C. Is a constitution just? In most countries, constitution is a compact document that comprises a number of articles about the state, specifying how the state is to be constituted and what norm it should follow. Kindly highlight this portion. The way you can see on the screens, please highlight this portion. This is an important definition. You can use it in pre as well as in mains, plus mains as well. When we ask for a constitution of a country, we are usually referring to this document, but some countries, the United Kingdom, for instance, do not have one single document that can be called the constitution. Rather, they have a series of documents and decisions that taken collectively are referred to as the constitution. So we can say that constitution is the document or set of documents that seeks to perform the functions that we mentioned above. But many constitutions around the world exist only on paper. They are mere words existing on a parchment. The crucial question is, how effective is a constitution? What makes it effective? What ensures that it has a real impact on the lives of people? Making a constitution effective depends on many factors. Mode of promulgation. This refers to how a constitution came into being, who crafted the constitution, and how much authority did they have. In many countries, constitutions remain defunct because they are crafted by military leaders or leaders who are not popular and do not have the ability to carry the people with them. The most successful constitutions like India, South Africa, United States are constitutions which were created in the aftermath of popular national movements. Although India's constitution was formally created by the Constituent Assembly between December 1946 and November 1949, it drew upon a long history of nationalist movements that had remarkable ability to take along different sections of Indian society together. The constitution drew enormous legitimacy from the fact that it was drawn up by people who enjoyed immense public credibility, who had the capacity to negotiate and command the respect of a wide cross section of society, and who were able to convince the people that constitution was not an instrument for the aggrandizement of their personal power. The final document reflected the broad national consensus at the time. Some countries have subjected their constitution to a full fledged referendum, where all the people vote on the desirability of a constitution. The Indian constitution was never subjected to such a referendum, but nevertheless carried enormous public authority because it has the consensus and backing of leaders who were themselves popular. Kindly highlight this portion the way you can see on the screen. This can be used in pre for elimination. There can be a question like, was the Indian constitution ever exposed to any kind of referendum? And you can say no. Moving forward. Although the constitution itself was not subjected to a referendum, the people adopted it as their own by abiding by its provision. Therefore, the authority of people who enacted the constitution helps determine in part of its prospects for success. Debate over constitution making in Nepal. Making a constitution is not always an easy and smooth affair. Nepal is an example of the complicated nature of constitution making. Since 1948, Nepal has had 5 constitutions in 1948, 1951, 1959, 1962, and 1990. But all these constitutions were granted by the King of Nepal. The 1990 constitution was introduced a multi-party competition, though the king continued to hold final powers in many respects. For many years, Nepal was faced with militant political agitations for restructuring the government. The main issue was the role of the monarchy in the constitution of Nepal. Some groups in Nepal wanted to abolish the institution of monarchy and establish republican form of government. Others believed that it may be useful to shift to limited monarchy with a reduced role of the king. The king himself was not ready to give up powers. He took over all powers in October 2002. Many political parties and organizations demanded the formation of new constituent assembly. The Communist Party of Nepal, Maoist, was in the forefront of the struggle for a popularly elected constituent assembly. Finally, under pressure of popular agitation, the king had to install a government acceptable to the agitating parties. This government has stripped the king of almost all powers. In 2008, Nepal emerged as a democratic republican after abolishing the monarchy. Finally, Nepal adopted a new constitution in 2015. This is a factual thing which you can just remember, although इसके आने के बहुत ज़्यादा chances नहीं हैं, but UPSC is known to pick up random facts from NCRTs. So this is a random fact and can be important. So kindly highlight the portion the way I have highlighted on the screen. Moving forward, The substantive provision of a constitution. It is the hallmark of a successful constitution that it gives everyone in society some reason to go along with its provision. A constitution that, for instance, allowed permanent majorities to oppress minority groups within the society would give minorities no reason to go along with the provision of the constitution. Or the constitution that systematically privileged some members at the expense of others, or that systematically entrenched the power of small groups in society, would cease to command allegiance. If any group feels that identity is being stifled, they will have no reason to abide by the Constitution. No Constitution by itself achieves perfect justice, but it has to convince people that it provides the framework for pursuing basic justice. Do this thought experiment. Ask yourself this question: what would be the contents of some basic rules in society such that they give everyone a reason to go along with them? The more a constitution preserves the freedom and equality of all its members, the more likely it is to succeed. Thus, the Indian constitution, broadly speaking, give everyone a reason to go along with its broad outlines. After studying this book, one should be able to answer this question in the affirmative. Balanced institutional design. Constitutions are often subverted not by people but by small groups who wish to enhance their own power. Well crafted constitution fragments power in society intelligently so that no single group can subvert the constitution. One way of such intelligent designing of the constitution is to ensure that no single institution acquires monopoly of power. This is often done by fragmenting powers across different institutions. The Indian Constitution, for example, horizontally fragments power across different institutions like the legislature, executive, and the judiciary, and even independent statutory bodies like the election commission. This ensures that even if one institution wants to subvert the constitution, other can check its transgressions. Kindly highlight this thing. This actually gives a good point about the Indian constitution, and this can be a good point in writing answers in mains. Please highlight it the way you can see on the screen. Moving forward, an intelligent system to check and balance has facilitated the success of Indian constitution. Another important aspect of intelligent institutional design is that the constitution must strike the right balance between certain values, norms, and procedures as authoritative and at the same time allow enough flexibility in its operations to adapt to changing new and needs and circumstances. Too rigid a constitution is likely to break under the weight of change. A constitution that is, on the other hand, too flexible will have no security, predictability, or identity to a people. Successful constitutions strike the right balance between preserving core values and adopting them to new circumstances. You will notice the wisdom of makers of Indian Constitution in the chapter on the Constitution as a living document. The Indian Constitution is described as a living document by striking a balance between the possibility to change the provisions and the limit of such changes. The Constitution has ensured that it will survive as a document respected by people. This arrangement also ensures that no section or group can on its own subvert the Constitution. Therefore, determining whether a Constitution has authority, you can ask yourself three questions. Were the people who enacted the Constitution credible? This question will be answered in the remaining part of this chapter. Secondly, did the Constitution ensure that the power was intelligently organized so that it was not easy for any group to subvert the Constitution? And most importantly, does the Constitution give everyone some reason to go along with it? Most of this book is about this question. Also, is the constitution the locus of people's hope and aspirations? The ability of constitution to command voluntary allegiance of the people depends on a certain extent upon whether the constitution is just. What are the principles of justice underlying the Indian constitution? The last chapter of this book will answer this question. Kindly highlight this portion and kindly answer, mark 1, 2, 3 the way you can see on the screen. This is an important thing to remember to analyze any part of the constitution wherever you will read further in polity or any of the NCERT books. Please mark them. Moving forward, how was the Indian constitution made? Let us find out how was the Indian constitution made. Formally, the constitution was made by the Constituent Assembly, which had been elected for undivided India. It held its first sitting on December 9, 1946. Kindly highlight this. This is an important date. ये pre में पूछी जा सकती है. Please highlight this. And reassemble as Constituent Assembly for divided India on 14th August 1947. Highlight this portion as well. ये confuse करने के लिए दोनों dates आपके दिमाग में conceptually clear होनी चाहिए. Its members were chosen by indirect elections by the members of the provincial legislative assemblies. Please highlight this part. This was not directly chosen by the people. They were chosen by provincial legislative assemblies. जो उस समय assemblies थी उनसे choose किया गया था. They are not directly chosen by the people. This can be a question for confuse you. Please highlight this portion. That had been established by the Government of India Act 1935. The Constituent Assembly was composed roughly along the lines suggested by the plan proposed by the Committee of the British Cabinet, known as the Cabinet Mission. Kindly highlight this part also. This can be a factual question. According to this plan, each province and each princely state or group of states were allotted seats proportional to their respective population, roughly in the ratio of 1:10 lakh. As a result, the provinces that were under direct British rule were to elect 292 members, while the princely states were allotted minimum 93 seats. The seats in each province were distributed among the three main communities, Muslim, Sikhs and General, in proportion to their respective populations. Members of each community in the provincial legislative assembly elected their own representatives by the method of proportional representation with a single transferable vote. The method of selection in the case of representative of princely states was to be determined by consultation. We must make our political democracy a social democracy as well. Political democracy cannot last unless there lies at the base of it social democracy. What does social democracy mean? It means a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality, and fraternity as the principles of life. These principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity are not to be treated as separate items in a trinity. They form a union of trinity in the sense that to divorce one from the other is to defeat the very purpose of democracy. Liberty cannot be divorced from equality, equality cannot be divorced from liberty, nor can liberty and equality be divorced from fraternity. Without equality, liberty would produce the supremacy of few over many. Equality without liberty would kill individual initiative. Without fraternity, liberty and equality could not become a natural course of things. Kindly please highlight this part. This is a very important and mark it as important. It is very important. This actually gives you an idea to solve questions. What is liberty or what is equality? These kind of questions are frequently asked in the prelims paper. So be very, very careful while reading this section. This is a very important section as far as it goes. Further, we will do in the next lecture. As far as this lecture is concerned, we'll stop it here. Thank you so much. We'll see you in the next one.